Thank you, everybody. Please take a seat. Thank you, thank you. All right, so tonight is a little bit different than most Freedom Night in America's. Tonight, this entire programming is brought to you by Turning Point Action, which is our political arm at Turning Point, which means I can openly talk about what's going to happen in 34 days, which is a little election we have happening here in this country and in this state. And so it's very important we talk about this. There is a survey that just came out today that shows that Christians viewing this election, turnout is going to be the record low for Christians of this election. It's amazing. And by the way, it's George Barna who did the study. In fact, let me read this to you. And I got to tell you, I believe it. The amount of apathy and the lack of concern that Christians have for the country is remarkable. Now, of course, we're the exception here, and there is time to fix it. But let me go into this data, because I couldn't believe it. I messaged George Barna. I said, come on. So 2 scientific polls were out this week. They say that Christian turnout is projected to be a 12% decrease from 2020 and a 17% decrease from 2016. Now, I know those of us that are believers, we find this hard to believe, right? Which is, how could the stakes be any higher? But we know what's happening. We know that wokeism has infected the American church. We know that far too many pastors are afraid to stand on principle and stand for truth. And everybody, let's be very clear that we as Christians are going to be held to a higher standard of whether or not we fight for this nation, fight for the unborn, fight for our kids, and fight for liberty. And we as Christians have no right to complain that our leaders are not as pro-life as we are, which I'm very pro-life, if we don't show up in big numbers and vote. You see, I'm on, I talk to a lot of pastors say, well, Charlie, Trump is not as pro-life as I'd like him to be. I get that. I'm 100% pro-life. I know you guys are too. But are we showing up in millions and millions of numbers to defeat the pro-abortion ballot referendums? And by the way, I think Kathy Harrod is here somewhere. I made a promise I was going to mention this to her. Where is Kathy? I don't know if she's here. Okay, what is the number? Is it 138? I get these. 139, thank you. I have to memorize all these other states. Grant me grace, okay? It's like 121 in Florida and all this. 139, every Christian, that is reason enough for you to vote down Prop 139. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? And this would make Arizona, thank you, there it is. That's a great sign right there. This would make Arizona the most radical pro-abortion state in the country. No restrictions. Late-term abortion capital of the country. And they are lying and deceiving in propaganda. Now, I just want to be honest with you that the polling shows that it's probably going to pass unless the millions of Christians in this state and pastors will speak morally clear about what is happening with Prop 139. But this is the problem, everybody, is that the biblical intent for government is that God is sovereign over all, and that there is government, and we are the counselor to the government. Like Daniel, like Esther, Mordecai, Jeremiah, Nehemiah, that we are the conscience of the nation as the church. That we correct our leaders, we replace them when they err, that the Bible calls right from wrong, and we say what the Bible says, which is, no, it's actually not okay to call a man woman and a woman man. It's not okay to have men and female sports. It's not okay to have an open border, but only because of the Bible are we able to even say what is good and what is bad and what is evil and what is wrong and what is male and what is female. You see, what's happened though is the church has been fed the lie that you don't have to get involved in politics. Well, don't be surprised when the church is no longer involved in politics, when all of a sudden your politics become less godly and your government becomes less godly. And then churches say, well, that's too messy. Well, the church is messy too. What's your point? You see, we have an opportunity in front of us, and I truly believe that God has voted early in this election. I believe that God voted early on July 13th when he spared the life of Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. I really believe that. And the media, they mock me when I say this. But how many more instances do we need to see that God is not yet done with this country? That God is not yet done with America. And the stakes are very clear in front of us. And since tonight is brought to you by Turning Point Action, we can get right to it, and I don't have to mince words. I will say this, and some people aren't gonna like it. And I'll say the first, which I don't think is very controversial, and the second one, which we'll build out. Number one, I do not believe that if you love the Lord, read the Bible, and call yourself a Christian, that you can vote for Kamala Harris for President of the United States. I do not believe that is possible. Now, people are gonna say, Charlie, you shouldn't judge. Let me be clear. If you love the Lord, there is no way you could vote for someone that worships abortion as the state-run religion of the United States of America. If you love the Lord, there is no way you could vote for a ticket that turns a blind eye to 320,000 kids that have been sold into sex slavery from the southern border that's happening right here in this state. If you love the Lord and you read the Bible, there is no way you can be okay with Easter Sunday becoming Transgender Day of Awareness that happened under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, according to Barna, 1 in 3 evangelical Christians are gonna vote for Kamala Harris. Those are Barna's numbers. I'm not making this up. How is this possible? Because we have watered down the gospel to affirm people's sin, not to challenge people in their sin and bring them to redemption in Jesus Christ. Those are two totally different things. A watered down gospel is how we receive, all of a sudden, people say, well, maybe Kamala Harris is better because she's nicer. Let me tell you right now, she is not a nice person. But you know what? They say, well, Donald Trump is mean and all these different things. People that have never met Donald Trump before. But do you know what? Maybe it's time that we have a Samson as president that is willing to stand up against our enemies, look the Mexican drug cartel in the eye and say, you're not gonna be putting fentanyl in the communities of Scottsdale, Peoria, Goodyear, and Queen Creek anymore. Looking Xi Jinping in the eye and saying, you know what, you're not gonna be able to keep on dumping manufacturing goods in this country. You see, you're not even just voting for Trump or Harris, and this is the second part of this. You are voting on which team of 5,000 people better fits your worldview. It's not Trump versus Harris. When a president is elected, there's a thing called the transition team. And a transition team has what's called the Blue Book. And the Blue Book has 5,000 people that are selected. And those 5,000 people will make decisions of whether or not men will shower with your daughter. Those 5,000 people make decisions of whether or not the church will be deemed non-essential again. Those 5,000 people make decisions of whether or not that your precious 6-month-old baby needs 72 vaccines to be able to go to daycare. Those 5,000 people will make decisions of what kind of food that your six-year-old will eat or will not eat. Those 5,000 people make decisions of whether or not we're gonna have a drag queen running our military or an alpha male running our military. Those 5,000 people matter a lot more of whether or not, well, I don't like Trump because he's not very nice. You are not thinking deeply about this election. It's which roster of 5,000 people better fits with your worldview. Which 5,000 people is gonna make sure that your kid lives in a free, stable, and secure society. You see, we know the type of 5,000 people that Kamala Harris will bring. She will bring Alejandro Mayorkas, which will keep the border open. She will bring in Anthony Fauci, who, do I have to say any more? Imagine 5,000 more Anthony Faucis. Where Donald Trump, who's he gonna put in his 5,000 roster? Bobby Kennedy in the cabinet to help make decisions about public health. He's gonna have Elon Musk help with Starlink and the Department of Government Efficiency. He's gonna have Franklin Graham counsel him when it comes to religious liberty. This is not even a close call, everybody. You see, they want to try to personalize this election. And we saw on display how good Donald Trump is at choosing people. Last night when J.D. Vance won the vice presidential debate last night, am I right? This is how you know J.D. Vance loves the Lord, by the way. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. How he was able to hold it when he was debating those 3 women last night was unbelievable to me. Stoic, amazing, legendary stuff. Everybody, here's the kicker though. If we don't turn out, the church, Christians, our neighbors, our friends, we might win the polls and we will lose in the count. You live in a state that matters more than even Utah. So guess what? To much is given, much is expected. You don't get to be a spectator this election, everybody. You don't get to just watch Fox News, buy the pillow, and hope everything's gonna work out. Instead, I'm gonna challenge you tonight to go to many of our booths in the hall and join what we call Commit 100. Let me tell you what Commit 100 is. Is anyone part of Commit 100 here? It's tough. By the way, again, there's only a few hands up because most people are lazy and don't want to do the work. I'll be honest, most people would rather hope that Trump becomes president and thinks that showing up to an event is doing the work. Guess what? That's nice, it's not. Commit 100 is that you're going to find, and we'll show you the data to do it, you're gonna make sure 100 low propensity voters go out and vote for Donald Trump. 100. Now mind you, I'm told that the bottom here fits about 1,000-ish people, right? What's the floor? Almost 1,500? Okay, almost every seat here is filled. So let me tell you the power of this audience. If everybody here, about 2,000 on the bottom? All right, let's just say 2,000, great. We'll do Trump math, 2,000, okay? So, we got 25,000 people here. So, we got 2,000 people. If everyone here chased 100 ballots, that would be 200,000 low propensity voters. Now, let me tell everybody, it is time, I know this makes you uncomfortable, it's time for those of us in Arizona to embrace something that we hate. I wish that everybody showed up on election day and showed a photo ID and we voted in person. But you guys know that's not how voting works in Arizona. It is election month, and next week ballots are sent out all across the state here. And if we are serious about winning this election, it is time that we encourage people that are less likely to vote in the election month period, not just hope they show up on election day. Remember what happened with Kari Lake? When machines were failing and long lines, we can never let that happen again. So the Commit 100 is this. This is the secret weapon of the 2024 election. Is that what if all of us that support Donald Trump and want him back in the White House and want his agenda to be implemented, is that we say that we are going to do the work to make this election too big to rig. And if we do that, we will be able to say, you know what? It doesn't matter what the polls say or the propaganda or the news networks. And here's how you can help. And here's where it gets really fun. Do you know that Dream City Church, starting next week, will have a drop box, a secure drop box for people to have ballots right outside here at church? So you might say, but I don't trust putting it in the mail. That's fine. Drive your friend and drive them here to Dream City Church and drop off the ballot here at Dream City Church. It'll have 24/7 security. Only people from the county that are allowed to actually count ballots will be able to have access to that drop box. It won't be happening on the side of the street. So instead of just handing it off to a random drop box on the side of the street, say, I'm gonna go to my church to drop off my ballot. And what a way to honor God with your vote and your ballot by saying that we're gonna have a drop box right here. And by the way, give it up for Dream City for wanting to have a drop box here on campus. How great is that? Really great. So I'll say this in closing before I welcome Dr. Ben Carson. When we're done, you guys can sign up to go to Commit 100. You guys can download the Turning Point Action app, where it's so easy. You open up the Turning Point Action app, and it will show you which of your neighbors haven't voted yet. And then you can, you can nag them and relentlessly bother them until they send in their ballot. Be like, hey, Sally Sue Marie, I know that ballot's not in yet. And once we see the ballot is in on our side, we remove them from the app, and we give you another house to go bother. You see, we have to become polite naggers for Trump the next 34 days, everybody. Because here's what the Democrats do. They will flood the valley with thousands of full-time people knocking on doors, and we say, we're gonna make it too big to rig on election day. Honestly, our movement is too big. We can't fit everyone to go vote on election day. And since we have more supporters than they do, shouldn't we give our team more days to vote, not less days to vote? Now, I'm not telling you how to change how to vote. If you want to vote on election day and you're cool waiting 2.5 hours in line and having the machines fail again, like it was for Kari Lake, fine, go vote on election day. But guess what? The plumber, the electrician, the welder, the police officer, the single mom, the nurse working a double, I want her to vote early so that she's not disenfranchised on election day like those hundreds of thousands of people were in the Kari Lake election. And most importantly, I want to make sure they vote at all instead of not voting and getting in the system. I'll say this in closing. We'll welcome Dr. Carson. This room right here could deliver Arizona for Donald Trump. This room could save the country and save Western civilization. I want you to look around. Nearly 2,000 people here tonight. Think about it. You are here for such a time as this, it says in the book of Esther. You are told by the enemy all the time, what you do doesn't matter. Oh, it's millions of votes, one vote doesn't matter. No. I'm here to tell you that the Attorney General of this state won by 270 votes last time in 2022. Donald Trump fell short, we all know what really happened, fell short by 11,000 ballots in 2020. That means that if everyone in this room just finds 6 new Trump voters, that is more than what we fell short of in 2020. What I'm trying to do is empower you and challenge you that this is right within our grasp. This thing is gonna be really close, and they are desperate. They've tried to impeach him, indict him, and assassinate him, and he still stands to fight for all of us. Now, the least we can do is fight for him. Join me in welcoming a truly honorable man and our guest tonight, Dr. Ben Carson, everybody. So I did a poor introduction, Dr. Carson, of you, but I just want to say this. Dr. Ben Carson is one of the most impressive and important people of our generation. And I can say this, if all young people, but especially the black youth of this country, would be told and taught of Dr. Ben Carson as a role model, this country would be in a much, much better place.
Well, you know, that used to be the case. They would tell a lot of the young black children about me until they became convinced that I was a conservative. And then all of that went away at that point. But let me just say this, and it's not just because he's sitting here, but when you read the Bible, ancient Israel had a lot of incredible people who helped to guide that society. And I think in this modern day, God has given us someone as brave, courageous, and intellectually superior as CharlieKirk. You know, we were talking about the fact that a lot of the Christian evangelicals are sitting on their hands, sitting on the sideline and complaining. I was reading recently about Billy Graham and how he felt about that, and how he felt that it was very wrong to complain about what was going on in society and not get involved in helping to fashion the direction of society. And a lot of Christians in particular say, but both sides are bad. And I don't want to be in a position of voting for somebody who is not what I think should represent us. I don't want to vote between the lesser of two evils. You've heard that said, I'm sure, many times. Well, unless one of the candidates is Jesus Christ, you're always voting between the lesser of two evils. So that's why we should use these incredible brains that God has given us to distinguish between policies that are helpful and policies that are not. Because there are certain individuals that some people just detest because they don't like their tweets and things like that. I'm not mentioning any names. But do you hate that person more than you love your children and your grandchildren? You know, that's what you got to think about. These things have to be put into perspective. And you know, it was Benjamin Franklin when he came out of that Constitution Hall in 1787. And he was asked, sir, what do we have here? A monarchy or a republic? And he famously said, a republic if you can keep it. Look how close we are to losing it right now. You have these crazy people who are using the justice system to go after their political enemies. Who would have ever thought that that would be possible in this country? And yet it is happening right before our eyes. Now, I hope that the person that they're going after actually goes up in the polls because people can see that. I'm not mentioning any names, but I hope that people can actually see what is going on. And isn't it interesting that our enemies, people like Iran, are trying to kill this person? They wouldn't be trying to kill him if he wasn't an existential threat to them. And nor would the deep state be trying to kill him if he wasn't an existential threat to them. We have to get behind the right people. And look at the beginnings of our nation. Look at our founding document, the Declaration of Independence. It says that our rights come from our Creator, AKA God. Rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, you don't have to be a great intellectual or academician to figure out which side is for life, which side is for death. And this is something that is particularly sensitive for me because as a pediatric neurosurgeon, I spent many hours, sometimes up all night, operating on little babies, many times premature babies, 25, 26, 27 weeks gestation. And I will tell you, they needed anesthesia. They could feel what you were doing. And yet, when people go after them in late-term abortions, there's no anesthesia. They reach into that uterus with a forceps and grab a limb and pull and twist, and out comes an arm or a leg or some other part of the body with no anesthesia. Can you imagine how barbaric that is? And we have the nerve to talk about some of the ancient societies and how they sacrificed children and how they were heathen. Are we any better when we do things like that? We do have a responsibility. It says in the book of Proverbs, the 24th chapter, verses 11 and 12, what about those who are drawn unto death, who are about to be slain, the innocent ones? Did you say anything? Did you do anything? And does not he who sees and knows everything know what you did? We have a responsibility to help those who cannot help themselves. And I'm not just talking about babies who haven't been born yet. I'm talking about people who are out there in our midst. You see all of these homeless people, for instance. Most of them are either addicted to drugs or are mentally ill. And Housing First doesn't really work. It gets them off the street temporarily, but 90% of them end up back on the street. And we have a gradually increasing number of such people. I talked to the head of the American Psychiatric Association who said that the vast majority of those people with medications and supervision could actually become functional individuals. And then as far as the addicts are concerned, unless you have familiarity with addiction, it's hard to understand what goes on with those people. But the vast majority of addicts, if they could push a button and they would no longer be addicted, they would wear that button out. They would love not to be addicted. But it's not easy. You get up in the morning, you say, okay, I'm done. I'm turning over a new leaf. Within literally hours, you're at it again. Because it's a physiological process that occurs in the brain. And it is very difficult to overcome. It requires compassion and real professional help to get over things like that. But unless we learn that, and we do that in an appropriate way, we're just adding to the numbers. And that is not helpful to us as a society. So we've got to use the brains that God has given us. And then as far as the concept of liberty, I've talked about life, liberty. Which party, which individuals push for liberty, for you being able to lead the life that you want as long as it's not interfering with somebody else? And which party pushes for mandates? You must do this and you must do this, and interfering with your life. It's not too hard to figure that out, is it? And you think about the fact that instead of allowing what has worked so well in a capitalist society, which is letting market forces drive where the efforts are put, we'd use mandates, we short-circuit the system, and we don't make the same kind of progress. It was because we had a system that encouraged entrepreneurship and innovation and rewarded people for their success. That's why the vast, vast majority of inventions, starting in the middle of the 18th century, were starting to come from this country. And by the time we reached the 20th century, it was overwhelmingly from this country that those things were coming, because we had a system that encouraged and rewarded it. There's nothing wrong with our system, but we allow the Marxists to convince our young people that it is. Can you imagine being a young person today and the things that they're being subjected to? It's done on purpose, because the Marxists want a one-world government. And what is the major obstacle to that? It's called the United States of America and our principles.
So Dr. Carson, Christians are in a place that is new. Billy Graham compared socialism and communism to the religion of Satan. Billy Graham was a crusader against Marxism and communism. We saw the moral majority in the 1980s and 1990s, where pastors were willing to speak out. There are 34 days for the election here. There are many pastors in the audience and people that influence pastors and millions of people watching online. What should the message be, and why is it that pastors have been reluctant to speak out like generations prior?
I think the message should be that we, the people of faith, by sheer numbers, have the ability to control the direction of our country. But if we sit on our hands, it's not going to happen. So I think we have an obligation for all of those who are coming behind us to get off of our tushes and actually get out there and do something, because you're doing it for your children and for your grandchildren, for all the people who are depending upon you. And we can change it. What we have to understand is that Marxism, socialism, communism, they thrive on intimidation. That's what they do. That's what political correctness and wokeism and canceling people is all about, intimidating them. And we have to recognize that sometimes if we get out there and we're aggressive and we're vocal, that yes, we may in fact be persecuted. The Bible says that. But against the backdrop of eternity, what is a little persecution in this life? We have much bigger goals that we have to be thinking about. And allowing your life to be controlled by fear is a real mistake. I remember when I was a youngster, I was deathly afraid of dogs. I'd be going to school and I would be late because I'd almost be there and there would be a dog. And I have to go all the way around the block and come back to a different direction. And then there'd be another dog. But then I met a man and he said, "Benny, a dog will not bother you if you're not afraid of it. Or at least if you act like you're not afraid of it. They will never bother you." I said, "Are you sure about this?" He said, "Absolutely, no question about it." So I said, "I'm going to test this out." because there was a dog down the street named Rusty who was really a nasty dog, and nobody liked to go down that way. So I said, I'm going to go down there. I go walking down there, and Rusty sees me, and his ears perk up, and he starts licking his chops. And he comes running after me, barking and snarling, and ran right up to me, and I said, this is a mistake. But then he just sniffed my leg, turned around and went back to the porch. And you know, from that day forward, Rusty never bothered me. He would bother other people, but when I walked by, he didn't bother to get up because he knew I wasn't afraid of him. And that's the same thing that will happen with these Marxists in our society. We just have to be brave enough to trust in God and get out there and do what we need to do and not worry about their silly threats, because who is ultimately in charge? And I have to admit that, you know, not being fearful was key to my neurosurgical career as well. You know, there are many people in my field who wouldn't do things because they were afraid. And I remember there was one young man who had a disease called Van Hippel-Lindau, where you develop these very vascular tumors throughout the nervous system. And he had developed one right in the pons, in the brainstem, a very delicate, inoperable area. And none of the adult neurosurgeons would touch him. Unfortunately for me, his wife was a pediatric neurosurgery nurse, and she worked on the floor where most of my patients were, so I couldn't escape her. And she said, you're going to have to operate on my husband. And I said, but I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon. And she said, well, he acts like a child. And so, you know, she kept twisting my arm until I finally went to see him. And I said, Craig, where this tumor sits, if I operate on you, there's no better than a 50-50 chance that you will survive. You will likely die on the table. And he said, Doc, if you don't operate on me, there's 100% chance that I'm going to die. I said, that sounds pretty mature. Well, they were very faithful Christians, and we spent a lot of time praying. I decided to take them to the operating room, went down to the area of the brainstem. A lot of new blood vessels had grown in to feed the tumor. It was very complex, but I was able, under the high-powered microscope, clear a small area on the brainstem and make a little incision and use a probe to find where the consistency was different, because I would know that's where the tumor was. Use some micro forceps, reached in and grabbed the capsule. I couldn't see it, I could just have to feel it. Take another micro instrument and start teasing the tumor away from the tissue. And as I was starting to see the tumor, as it was starting to come out of the hole, the anesthesiologist announced that the brainstem potentials had gone flat. The electrical activity that shows us that there is brain activity. And he said, I told you you were going to kill him, because he had been very much opposed to the operation. Well, I continued the operation and got the tumor completely out. No brain stem activity. And at the end of the operation, of course, he didn't wake up. Went back to the ICU with full life support. A lot of prayers that night. But when I came in the morning, he was extubated, sitting up in the bed, telling jokes. Would have not have done that if I had not felt confident that God was behind me. I wouldn't have done that for a lot of things that I did, knowing that God is there. And we have to recognize, no matter how grim things look in our society, he is there. And if he was willing to save Sodom and Gomorrah for 10 people, we got this. We got this. We don't have to worry about that at all.
So Dr. Carson, there are so many issues facing the country right now, and you detailed it perfectly. The border is one of the biggest ones. And we're here in a border state, as I mentioned, 320,000 missing kids. I just want you guys to understand that. 320,000 missing children in just the last 4 years that are now prostitutes and being used as sex slaves for the cartel. Just so you understand that the drug cartels, they went from selling drugs, they still do that, to selling human beings. They get $10,000 a head per person. So it's, we talk a lot about slavery in this country as if it stopped. Slavery is alive and well, and just go down to Yuma and I could show you the slave trade. In fact, there's an amazing new documentary that James O'Keefe has that's coming out called Line in the Sand. It's amazing, you guys should see it. It's so chilling where, these Border Patrol agents, they are now blowing the whistle saying that they are told by their superiors, so Mayorkas and Kamala Harris, to get as many kids in the country as possible with people that are not their parents, that they have no idea who these people are. And these are unaccompanied minors that then just get thrown to a pimp, and this 13-year-old then just goes and, is a sex slave for the rest of their life. And our government is co-sponsoring and facilitating it, and the media could not care less. Like, the media does not care about this at all. And this is not even talking about the gang problems with Trendeya Warga or the Haitian problem in Springfield. That's all separate. This is just the children part of it. Dr. Carson, in the scriptures, it is repeated about what happens to a society or a people or individuals that mistreat children. Your thoughts on the horror of what's happening on the southern border?
Well, I hope some of you saw the movie The Sound of Freedom. There were many attempts to suppress that movie for strange reasons. But, Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." And that for anyone who led children astray, it would be better for a millstone to be placed around their neck than to be thrown into the depths of the sea. That tells you how the Lord feels about children and about protecting those children. And you think about a young child, think about fertilization when it occurs. And you've got a female gamete, 23 chromosomes, a male gamete, 23 chromosomes. Then fertilization occurs and you've got a zygote with 46 chromosomes, a complete genetic map for a new person. Not part of the mother, not part of the father, a new human being. And that brain starts developing immediately, millions of neurons every day, later on billions of neurons a day, and interconnections. When a baby is born, that brain is still developing at a terrific rate, which is why newborn babies sleep 20 to 22 hours a day. The brain continues to develop right into your mid-20s. Some people it never develops, but on average, that is the case. Now, think about the implications of what I just said. In our school systems and in other locations, you have adults telling 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old kids with non-developed brains that they may not be a girl or a boy. Think about that. Isn't that the reason that God gives children parents to protect them when they're vulnerable like that? It is nothing short of child abuse that we're dealing with. And we have a responsibility to speak up for those children, to do what we can. And I hope that many of you will think seriously about getting involved in the legislative process, maybe as state representatives, as school board people, to make sure that these things don't happen, because it's not just not voting, it's not getting involved that is hurting us. We need to be leaders in these areas. We need to wield power in these areas. And you're told from the time that you're a little child that there are two things you should never talk about in public: religion and politics. Those are the exact things we need to be talking about, because that's where the attack is coming from. And now is the perfect time, because, you know, there's an election coming up. I'm a 501c3, so I can't tell you who to vote for. But I can. But I can tell you, it's pretty clear that our country is moving in the wrong direction. And you look at how our families are being dismantled and not forming. You know, people are not getting married, or they're getting married late. Women are not bearing children. We're down to 1.6 births per woman. It takes 2.1 to maintain the population. We're dwindling away. And the families are where the values are passed through. So if children are not getting appropriate counseling from their parents and guidance from their parents, they're going to get it from somewhere else. And this is what you're seeing on these college campuses, with these kids running around, you know, proclaiming Hamas as the victim, when they're the ones who destroyed the lives of 1,400 Israelis on October the 7th, about a year ago. But it's because they don't actually know the history of what's going on. They don't know about the Holocaust. They don't know about hatred. They don't know anything about Jacob and Esau and Ishmael and Isaac, or any of the history of all the things that have been going on. And as a result of that, they become easily manipulated. One of the things that Marxists do is they dumb down the population. They always do that first, so that you can gaslight people. And that's exactly what's happening in our society today. You see those man on the street interviews, and they ask them the simplest questions, and they have no idea. It must hurt to be that stupid. But the fact of the matter is that has to be done for you to say things like the border is secure, with millions of people coming across, some of whom are terrorists, by the way. And it is only the grace of God that is saving us right now, because we've got a lot of them in here right now. And we have to pray that God will honor his faithful and save our country, but also to give us some real leadership.
Amen. Let's do some questions, guys. If you want to start lining up for questions, I want to remind you two things. Please support Dr. Ben Carson's nonprofit, the American Cornerstone Institute. Very important. And secondly, I'm going to keep on challenging you throughout the night to, after we're done, spend an extra 5 minutes before you run to your car and go to those tables and find out how you can make a difference this election. Even if it's 2 votes, 3 votes, 5 votes, 10 votes. Our team is ready, willing, and able to put you to work. Okay, where are we? Are we prepared on either side? Yeah, let's start. This side's a little light, so we can start moving there, but let's start here with the Let's Go Brandon t-shirt. Or actually, we'll start with the other gentleman. Then we'll get to the swing voter with the Let's Go Brandon shirt. Yeah, undecided. All right, yeah, we'll start on this side.
Hi, I'm George Wood. I want to know if we can do something more than we're doing to show that Kamala Harris's rollout is not the person that she really is. There have been so many people that have been leaving her staff as vice president that may have also been happening when she was Attorney General. We need to have someone come forward and tell us what it's really like to work and be around Kamala Harris.
Well, that's a good question. You know, here's where common sense comes into play. Kamala Harris was the most left-wing senator in the Senate. And look at what she did when she was in San Francisco as the DA, destroyed that place. What did she do in California as the Attorney General? Destroyed that place. And what will she do as president? Destroy the whole country. The pattern has already been set. But the reason that you know that she has really not moved off of those far left-wing philosophies that she has is that her left base is not mad at her. If they really thought she had moved off, they would be piping mad, and they're not. So that tells you exactly what you need to know.
It's a very smart point. That they know that it's all just rhetoric to try to get political power. If she wins, there will be 30 million new illegal people in the country in 2 years. They will all get amnesty. She will pack the U.S. Supreme Court. She will add D.C. and Puerto Rico as states, and we will never win an election again.
Exactly.
Besides that, everything will be great. Yes.
Dr. Carson, I want to thank you for your character. I so admire you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've been trying to weaponize people's voices with the greatest war in the covenant because I believe we're at war between Satan's marionettes and God's warriors. And there's no middle ground. Not to act is to act. Not to speak is to speak. Why is the greatest war in the covenant not being talked about? It has God all over it, and you would think that that would be front and center.
Well, I think more people are starting to talk about it, particularly more pastors. We were on a call today with thousands, probably tens of thousands of pastors, along with President Trump and Paula White, talking about how do we disseminate this information, how do we get it out there. It's going to require a lot of effort. We've only got 34 more days to do it. But if everybody uses their sphere of influence in an appropriate way, I think we can make the difference. When you're looking at states where the difference between winning and losing is 5, 10, 15, 20,000 votes, that's not a lot of votes in a state. And if we can get organizations like this one, if everybody here makes it their goal not only to vote, but to get everybody in their sphere of influence to vote the right way, we're going to be just fine.
Ready? Bob Baker, Dr. Carson. When you ran for president, I was living in California. I went up to a rally in Sacramento for you, and I was so impressed I volunteered to be your campaign manager for Ventura County in California. So
Thank you.
I think a lot of you. Dr. Carson, why isn't our side, when we have debates on abortion, it's always about the woman's body? Why aren't we stressing the baby that's inside the mother? Why aren't we talking about, you mentioned the anesthesia, and that those babies are suffering tremendously in their womb.
Absolutely.
Why aren't we talking about them, doctor?
Well, that's a very good question, because have you noticed that when somebody murders a pregnant woman, they get 2 counts of murder? But when they just murdered a baby, they're upholding women's rights? That doesn't make a lot of sense. We need to start talking about how these things don't make sense. And, a relationship that is one of the most sacred relationships on earth, that of the mother and child, should not be made into one of animosity, where one is inconvenient. And one of the things that we have to recognize as a society is that we have to provide alternatives. We have to make adoption much easier and less expensive. We have to have support mechanisms, and we need to start teaching our young people a word that they don't know anymore. It's called abstinence. Now, one other thing I might just mention about abortion and being pro-life. We have people who think life begins at conception. I'm one of them. We have people who believe it starts at 6 weeks when there's a heartbeat. Some who think it starts at 15 weeks when there's sensation. Doesn't matter which one of those groups you belong to, we're all under the same pro-life umbrella, and we need to stop fighting each other and recognizing that we're moving toward a society that honors life. That's really the key. And we're going to do much better with conversion of people than we are going to do with coercion of people. Just teach them what is going on and help them to understand that. That's why so many young people are pro-life, because they've seen, due to technology, what is actually in that uterus. And when you see those little arms and legs and that cute little face and that nose and lips, it's really hard to say that that's a meaningless bunch of cells.
Hi, I saw a post from Fox News this last week that said men pour into church pews and flip the female trend on faith for the first time in modern American history. Why do you think men are gravitating to the faith so much more than women, and do you see this as a hope for America's future?
I'm going to give that one to Charlie.
Yeah, I saw the same article. Actually, I wanted to do a podcast episode on it, but been a busy news week with everything. So look, men are the most conservative that they've been in 50 years. They're also the most religious they've been in 50 years, which is amazing. And women are the most liberal they've been in 50 years and the least religious they've been in 50 years. And let me tell you why. The culture that women are ingesting is complete poison. From the pop artists, yes, like Taylor Swift and many others that glorify a non-married, single, career-driven, boss babe culture that is all about body sovereignty and autonomy, not about morals or objective truth. And the screed for that worldview is abortion, okay? That abortion is the way that they tell the world that I'm in charge and you are not, and that I have my own sovereignty. And nothing buttresses up against that worldview more than religion. Because by definition, when you enter a church, you actually aren't the boss of your own life. That there's a God and you aren't him. And you should bow at the cross that Jesus died for you. And so that worldview comes in just complete contradiction to any person, but especially a young lady that is being told the entire life that you're the boss of your own life. You don't need support. You don't need a man. You know, you should just freeze your eggs, get on hormonal birth control. And I'm not here to judge anybody that does those things, but we can agree that the culture is very, very sick right now for young ladies. They're the least married, most depressed, most suicidal, most anxious generation in history. Now, young men are the exact opposite. They're suffering, but they're ingesting culture that is a lot different. They're ingesting culture that is Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh or the CharlieKirk Show or any one of the, these where it's a different perspective, which is masculinity is good. God built a world that has distinctions, and these distinctions are male and female and good and evil and man and nature and holy and profane. And the way that you fit into those distinctions is a hierarchy. You're above the animals but below God, so you better get right with God because you aren't God. And so the through line of masculine content, and you see this with the rise of so many of these people, for example, the conversion of Russell Brand and people like that are becoming more religious in their approach, is that it leads you eventually to the cross, where the cultural content that young ladies are putting in their life leads you further and further away from the cross. And so you see this in politics and religion. And so it's a great thing long term. So if you were to say, Charlie, would you rather have young women be religious or young men? It's difficult, but probably young men, because eventually once the young ladies get married, hopefully the men will lead them towards Christ. If they get married though, and that's the tragedy, is that young ladies are increasingly saying no to marriage. They're increasingly saying no to children. And it's a toxin. And we need better, godly female role models that can be the female Jordan Petersons, that can lay out a deep and biblical and exciting and thoughtful philosophical worldview that a young woman that is currently, quite honestly, drowning in this sea of postmodernism can attach to. And I see it on these campuses where, again, we have a ton of support. By the way, we were at Grand Canyon University today. We registered 750 new voters for Trump today. Great work, guys. Yeah, that's right. It was really great. So I don't want to, paint with too broad of a brush, but we have never seen young men this conservative and young ladies this liberal. We've never seen this divide before. And it makes sense. And the church, this final thing I'll say is the church needs to stop feminizing its approach. And that doesn't mean, I'm not saying that women can't be involved in ministry. I'm not saying that. Feminizing your approach is watering down the truths of the gospel to make the emotionality and to make it seem as if you can't say something blunt that is true because you're worried about offending somebody else. I love, women, of course, and I love all people, but women are far less likely to say something that might offend others because they are more agreeable, because God made women more agreeable. Men are more likely to say blunt and, not Angel. I know, Angel, you're the exception for that. No, I'm kidding. No, or Aubrey. But generally, and we see this, a man is more likely to say something that might offend a group and be an outlier, where a young woman is far less likely because they want to fit in. This is why women are more likely to be part of social contagions, more likely to be trans, more likely to be, cut themselves, more likely to be goth, more likely to be part of suicide cults, so on and so forth, because young ladies are more agreeable towards the kind of hive-mindedness where young men are not. Again, this is just nature. You can disagree with me. This is just the way that God made us. So what is the solution? The solution is the church needs to get back to preaching the word of God as it is written, not trying to put it through a worldly, secular lens.
That might explain why women don't seem to be upset about men playing in women's sports.
That is exactly right. That is such a profound point, which is, we have heard forever. Thank you for bringing that up. Where are the feminists? Where are the feminists? If you study second and third wave feminism, transgenderism is the logical outpoint of feminism. It was never about women's rights. It was about, we're okay with anyone who sympathizes with the struggle of a woman. That was always the Betty Friedan kind of creed. If you go back to the feminine mystique, you go back to the original complaints of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, they're okay with the trans thing because they say, oh, they want to be like us. That's cool. Anyone can be part of the woman club. When again, that is against biological reality, but also by definition, they're also afraid of the fight and the ostracization that opposing the trans jihadis bring. So if you stand up against a trans zealot, by definition, you are being disagreeable in this culture, right? You are inviting cancellation, ostracization, you're inviting a fight. That's why men are the ones that are more likely to stand up against the trans part of it. That's why there's not a lot of Riley Gaines out there. There's not a lot of people standing, because they say, well, I don't want to be, an outcast. And so it's perfectly put, Dr. Carson, and that is why I've said all along, it should be up for the dads of these daughters to fight on behalf of their daughters to make sure that men are not in their sports.
Good evening. Thank you so much. Hey, Charlie. Dr. Carson, I just want to say I'm so thrilled that you did not listen to the people that tried to discourage you from publishing your book, The Perilous Fight. Like you, I did not grow up in a traditional nuclear family. Our parents divorced when we were young. And like you, I'm also a huge advocate for the traditional family. My question tonight is about government agencies and the data that they put out. So Charlie, on your podcast recently, you said, it's not a quote, but you said, we can't trust the FBI, the CDC, the DOJ, Department of Education, Secret Service. You also said we can't trust Harvard. So if we can't trust these government agencies, and I don't, then why should I trust the data that they put out when they say that 70% of children born in this country that look like me are born into a home without a father, and more than 50% of the violent crime in this country is committed by people that look like me? Why should I trust that data?
I'll start with it. You should always verify your sources in multiple places. That's really the only solution for that kind of thing. The CDC, certainly our governmental health agencies, have done almost irreparable damage to their reputations over the COVID crisis. And it's going to take a long time to repair that. But the deep state is very deep, and it traverses multiple agencies. And that's the reason that they're so afraid of a particular candidate, because he recognizes that they need to be cleaned out. And that's why they'd be willing to do virtually anything to make sure that he does not become president.
It's a great question. So part of the problem with these agencies is the data. It's not everything. Some of the data that they publish is legit. For example, really hard to falsify murder statistics, right? You got a dead body, it's either dead or not, right? And a lot of that is locally sourced. Really hard to falsify like annual mortality rates. Super easy to falsify death from COVID, right? Was it from COVID or with COVID? Totally, right? So that's very legit. From the crime statistics, a lot of that is locally sourced. So it's state and local and county crime statistics that are then sent up to the FBI. So that's usually more accurate, and it's been third or fourth party checked. But the biggest problem with the institutions is less about the data, and it's more about what they do with the data. So let me give you an example. With COVID, within 30 days, we knew what the COVID death rate was for people that did not have pre-existing conditions, that were not chronically overweight, and were under the age of 50. We knew that data. And the CDC knew it, and you knew it, yet they still decided to lock down the entire country and mask your kid and to make you wear, a mask when you shower and shut down all the schools, all that stuff. And so there's two reasons for this. It's less about the data. It's more about, number one, the way our institutions are constituted, because we want strong institutions, is that it's a reverse meritocracy, that you ascend by failure, not by excellence, that Anthony Fauci climbed the ladders of NIH by failing and covering up on scandals his entire career. Read Bobby Kennedy's book, by the way, The Real Anthony Fauci, you'll see. And not by having great ideas, but instead being a creature and an organism of Washington. So it's the way that we choose personnel. And then number two, the culture of our government agencies is far more about status quo protection and elite capture than it is about serving the interests of the American people. So the CDC is far more interested in making sure that Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson are never held accountable for vaccine injuries than they are actually trying to promote the public health. And the best person on this, again, is Bobby Kennedy. So a final example, I could talk about this all day long, is the FDA. So the FDA we all agree on the data. You go to the FDA, they will say, okay, half of all kids are chronically obese. Half. Okay, 50% of our kids are obese. Japan, 3% of their kids are obese. So what is the FDA's solution? The FDA's solution is not more activity or to change the food guidelines or to go after the poison and the pesticides in our food. Their solution is taxpayer-funded Ozempic for kids. Not a joke. So we agree on the data. Half our kids are obese. The FDA says what we need is taxpayer-funded Medicaid for kids to inject themselves on a permanent injection for the rest of their life. Only if you are a proxy or a employee of a Danish drug company could you believe something as insane as that, right? So I don't trust the institutions for those reasons. Some of the data I do trust, but it's more what they do with the data that I think is the biggest problem. Great question, thank you.
Hello, Dr. Carson and Mr. Kirk. My name is Ray Ray. I'm a student at GCU. So one, thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate that. My question today is, I got a lot of friends at GCU that frankly believe their vote doesn't matter, and the stakes this election, you know, they say it every year that this is the biggest election ever held, and this one, that might be very true for. So how can I lovingly convince them that their vote does matter and it actually is going to count towards something, and just, you know, get involved with politics without, you know, being super corrupt?
Yeah, I would suggest you have them look up the congressional record for January the 10th, 1963, in which Congressman Herlong of Florida read in the 45 goals of communism in America, and see how many of them are true, and recognize that we are pawns in a game and are being manipulated. And the only way that we can stop it is exercising the power of the vote, which our founding fathers left in the hands of we the people, knowing that one day we would reach this stage, that there might be a time when government could not be trusted, but that the people could be. That's the only way, and you got to convince them of that.
Yeah, so are these people that think that their vote is going to be stolen, or is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think they also think that they frankly just don't matter, and there's too many other opinions that differ from them.
Okay, so yeah, again, this is, I don't know the specific details of this case. I gotta be honest though, of all the objections that I hear in my career, someone telling me that they don't have 4 minutes to fill out a piece of paper to save the country is the one where I have like no patience, okay? These people will wait in a 45-minute TSA line to go on vacation in Orlando, and they won't fill out a piece of paper that is 4 minutes so that we can save the civilization, okay? I have no patience for that whatsoever, and I honestly believe, and I know you'll agree with this, I think it's an unclean spirit from the pit of hell to like hypnotize us to believe that it's somehow a big waste of time to fill out a piece of paper. No, it's your duty to do that. That's the minimum obligation in a free society. Like very base minimum. And so, yeah, I just I'm awfully dismissive of it because we're losing our society largely because of attitudes like that. Okay, we'll take a couple more. Yes, sir.
Welcome, Dr. Carson. Good to see you, Charlie. Charlie, I want you to know that my family and I keep you and your family lifted up, and we pray for you all the time. My question is actually for both you, but mostly to Charlie. My question tonight is about self-control. Charlie, I saw you on Charlie versus 25 woke students. Very entertaining. Everyone should see it. You were surrounded. There was one student in particular who said horrific things about your family, and it was actually difficult for my wife to watch. How did you exercise self-control in that moment? If she had said these things to me, I fear the outcome would have been different.
I have a good humor about it. First of all, this is where my faith comes in. Number one, that's a very broken individual who obviously does not know the Lord, who basically like wished death upon my family. It was really, I don't know, if you watch it, it's hard to watch. Was wishing those awful things. And it's very clear she doesn't have Jesus in her life. And so I don't look at her as an obstacle, but as an opportunity, and I hope that Christ comes into her life, and because that's no way that someone should talk, right? But you asked the question, and I think Dr. Carson would agree, because he has much better self-control than I do, way better. I mean, this guy's a brain surgeon that saved people's lives, right? I would be all over the place, right? It would not be good. I don't have self-control. It's a fruit of the Holy Spirit. And so when you invite the Holy Spirit in your life, you get things that your flesh does not have. I could tell you what my flesh wanted to do in that moment, but we are more than flesh when we invite the Spirit into us. You become, as in Romans 12:2, it says, do not conform to the ways of this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I like to believe that when I encounter some of these very hostile, aggressive, college students, that it's not my flesh, but it's the Holy Spirit that is transforming me into a much better, hopefully holier version of myself. Because my flesh would love to kind of remark in that instance. But we all have things we need to work on. Self-control has definitely been mine. And praise God, the last 12 years, the Holy Spirit's been at great work on me in that regard. Two more. Yeah, just two more here, really quick. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Charlie. I'm also from GCU. I was on the event committee, getting people filling out ballots. You probably saw me. I'm in your video.
Can I pause just really quick again? We registered 750 new voters for Donald Trump today at GCU. And you did a great job. What's your name again?
Megan.
Megan, give it up for Megan. She was working her tail off today. She did great.
Me and a bunch of other people that I know, some of them are here somewhere that I can't find, but I know they're here. My question for you is, I'm a senior graduating college in April, and I know how important it is to speak out about this election and our politics, but there's a part of me that worries because I'm trying to find a job after I graduate, and there's so many companies that will discriminate against people like me for being vocal about my beliefs, especially in the field that I'm in, which is cybersecurity, which is very woke. So what's your advice on kind of facing persecution in the job market for your beliefs?
Yeah, I would say if they're going to persecute you for your beliefs, you don't want to work for them anyway.
I will say this, you are right. The big cybersecurity companies are terrible. CrowdStrike being one of them. I think I got that right. I think they're actually headquartered here, actually, or they were, or their CEO lives here or something. That was the Hillary Clinton company. It's legit. Here's my piece of advice. It is almost always the right decision to prioritize truth above convenience, and the bridge that makes that possible is courage. And you get courage from Christ. It won't be easy and it won't be comfortable, but we as Christians are not called to comfort, we're called to something greater. So I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It might be difficult, but that is an early test in your life of what you believe and why you believe it. Because if you take the job at, CrowdStrike or some cybersecurity company, and you have to all of a sudden attend transgender trainings and do mandatory white privilege seminars, and that will torture your soul. And no six-figure salary is worth that.
I worked 2 internships at Cisco Systems. I had to do all that at both, so I understand.
I will say there is a growing market, thanks to Elon Musk. You can go work for Starlink, by the way. I think that would be great. There is a growing world of non-woke tech people, and I think you're gonna find a great career. I'm confident of that. Thank you. Okay, final question here. Final question.
Dr. Carson, I'm so grateful to be able to ask you this question. It's come to my attention recently that pregnant women, young women, are using marijuana while they're pregnant for morning sickness or whatever reason. In your professional opinion and what you know about the neurology and the development, how does marijuana affect the fetus?
Well, there's not a tremendous amount of research on what it does to the fetus, but there is a growing body of evidence that it is very deleterious for the developed brain. And people have flashbacks, people have all kinds of things that destroy their lives. I was talking to a young man today at another setting who was talking about how marijuana had destroyed his life and how he was so uncomfortable with the increasing attempts to legalize these substances. But virtually everything that goes into the bloodstream of a pregnant woman gets to some degree to the baby. It is attenuated by the straining system that exists in the placenta, but they can't completely eliminate all of the harm that goes there. So I would strongly advise any pregnant woman to stay far, far away from these deleterious drugs.
Well, Dr. Carson, I know I speak for everyone here. Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your clarity. And thank you for your boldness.
Thank you.
You are one of our greatest living Americans. Give it up for Dr. Carson. And please get involved, everybody. We need you guys. Chase ballots. Thank you.